Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and in today's video, we are going to go over what's on my sewing table, and it's a lot, hopefully, wrapping up projects that you've been seeing on the channel, and I have a lot to say about it, so stay with me. This quilt is the 9-patch Trip Around the World quilt that has been on this channel for months and months and months. And about the time I get discouraged about that, I remember quilting is slow and I'm a part-time quilter with a full-time job and a full-time life. And so is my long arm quilter, and so is everyone else in my life. So this quilt has just been really a joy to work on and to plan. And I got it back from the long arm quilter, and that's really exciting. So that means a quilt story is coming on it soon. But I'm on to the part with the binding. When I was trying to decide what to do with this quilt and the binding, I actually laid the whole thing out on my own bed. And one of the ways that I consider, I'm going to pick, gosh, y'all, I'm so sorry. There are threads all over this thing because I've been working on the binding at night. But I looked across the whole thing. I didn't want to do really a colorful binding because the whole quilt is colorful. And I didn't want anything to detract from it, but I wanted it to be something interesting. And if that is not the conundrum of binding, I don't know what is. So it's like you want something interesting, but you don't want it to compete with the quilt top, but you want it to complement it. And what's all along the edge of this quilt is mostly, oh gosh, that wasn't a string, that was actual thread. It's greens and blues. So just these, there's the little girls in the forest, there's the forest green, there's this kind of grass green, and then it goes into this blue and the navy, and that's what's along the edge. It's not this lipstick and plum and all these gorgeous bright colors. It's really blues and greens. And so I started thinking about it, and I'm like, what if I did the color of caramel? And salted caramel specifically, because if it's not salted, it's not worth it. I'm just kidding. Any caramel is worth it. I looked and looked and couldn't find exactly what I was looking for. And my local quilt store's Exact Studio, sewing studio, has closed, and I was devastated. And my youngest and I went to another quilt store and found this fabric that I have in front of me. The name of it is Cinnamon. I don't remember who the fabric maker is. I think it's Michael Miller, could be Robert Kaufman. It's a man's name. So if you really like this fabric, you can Google cinnamon fabric man's name. It's not going to work. But it's, so this is a fabric that I chose, and I have machine stitched it to the front, and I'm going to be hand stitching it to the back. I've already started. It is about the color of the trees in the little forest fabrics. And once I got it home and held it up to the quilt, I was like, yeah, this is it. And my younger daughter, who I call the colorist, came out into the living room, and I was working on the binding, and she said, I don't know who picked that fabric, but they deserve an award. And it was me that picked it. She helped, of course. So I would pull out several ones, and then I was like, I think this is it. And so she agreed, and I do too, that it is a lovely color, and I think it's really going to enhance. Plus, it gives it that frame that is what binding is so great for. But I think it's just really going to be lovely. And then the back is kind of a cream peach, and so it works with that as well. So that's where I am with that. I'm really excited to have it done. My cousin, we have been in communication through Instagram, and she's coming to Birmingham in a couple of weeks, maybe I think it's a couple of weeks. So I've got a little bit of time, but not much. So you'll see this on a quilt story soon. And I think that's enough about that. Let me get the next thing. This quilt top has been such a delight to make, but it seems like it won't go away. I'm wondering if everyone is tired of the Magnolia quilt. I finished this quilt top on May the 5th, and I know that because I posted it to Instagram. Quilt top finished. I was so excited. So it's been over a month, and I have been mulling and mulling over the backing. And I mentioned this on my sewing table, that I had a plan to use all of the little triangles that are the offcuts from these snowball corners and the flip and trim. I was going to use this gray fabric and and I didn't know what size I wanted to do the pieces to do the corners on. So I've just been kind of thinking about it. Several of you suggested doing like a raw edge applique, which is a great idea. I think it was Kylie who's, I think, Kylie, I hope it's you. If I'm miscrediting someone, I apologize. Sent me a link to a Missouri Star Quilting Company video for a quilt that's called Confetti. And what it is, it's a square with the snowball corners on the two opposing corners, and then a solid block, and then that row repeats. And then on the next row, it's a solid block, and then the confetti pieces are on opposite corners. And so it's Misty from Missouri Star Quilting Company kind of walked through. When you guys put links to videos or suggestions, I actually really do watch them. So she sent me this link and I was like, oh, I'll check it out. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And it's kind of what I had envisioned, but gave me some specifics. But I had still just been thinking, gosh, I don't know what size to make them on the back. So I got out the quilt top, had a day off a couple of days ago, and I spread the quilt top out on the floor as one does so that I could figure out how big the backing fabric needed to be. And I got it all spread out and realized that I have not done the border on the quilt top. So it's supposed to have a 3.5 inch border. And in my case would be white fabric all around the whole quilt top. And so I realized this literally as I was getting ready to make the backing. So I'm not done. It's not finished, but I went on ahead. I forged ahead with my backing, and I want to show it to you because I am excited about it. So let me move this, but we're going to keep it out because I have to reference it. And I'm struggling with the folding. So here is the backing, one good piece of it. And again, pieces, you would think that I would lint brush this before we start these videos. But we actually just made a video for Patreon about this, I did the whole, how am I going to do this on camera for the patrons. And so it was on the floor. So it's picked up a bunch of crap from my floor because I didn't vacuum my floor either. But anyway, so you just got a little bit of a snapshot into my life. I'm not sure that was information you wanted. So this is what the back is going to look like. And I have to tell you, I love it. I think it's so fun. And I think when it's really big, it's going to look really great. So what I did is I used up all of that remaining Madras plaid. So I started with those triangles first and then used kind of almost one, gosh almighty, used one or two triangles from every block on the front. And that's how I decided how to mix it up. So some of them you'll see, for example, this yellow gingham is here, but it's mostly plaid. And then there's that seafoam, and then here's the matching gingham for that. I think it's going to be really fun. So it's just, the hope here is that it'll be interesting. And it used up those little triangles. I keep saying used up. It didn't use up. It made a small dent in all of those triangles. So yeah, I have no idea what I'm going to do with the rest of those triangles. Something. It'll go in the scrap bin. And, maybe I'll have a raffle for my scrap bin. So that's that. But then, of course, in doing so, what I have realized is that this too is going to need a border, not only to make it match the front, but also to give me enough extra to quilt it. And I have sealed my fate and will be doing the quilting myself because of these border situations. The first thing I had to decide, I'm going to use a white border here. This backing is, I'm still kind of on the fence. I can do this one, which it'll really look like a frame because I'll need the 3.5 inches to make it as wide as the quilt top, and then an additional 3 or more inches so that when I go to quilt it, if it crawls, I'm good. If I go with this one, dark border around it, and yeah. So then you can't consider the backing and the front without also thinking of the binding. So I called a family meeting, town meeting, and we kind of all decided that navy would probably be the way to go with the binding. So this is a linen cotton blend that's navy it's actually heathered navy. So it has kind of some black or charcoal gray. So if I do go with this one, it will look like this. And you can see this kind of blends with that plaid. Hopefully it will blend with everything else as well. This is more my favorite because I was thinking that way it would just be more of a similar color across the back, but it's not exact. And this is one of those things that it looks close enough with this little piece right here next to it. But if I get a whole lot of it, and this has a little bit more of a yellow cast, I'm afraid it will end up clashing. So I think what we decided in our family meeting for my quilt back, is that the darker hopefully will set off this fun confetti back, give it something to kind of ground to in a color that does not clash. And then you can see how that will look with this, if this is where I end up with the binding. And I had a moment where I was like, is there going to be enough of this fabric to do the binding? And then I remembered that video that I made. That's how much binding can you get from a shirt? And it's so much binding. So I think I have a shirt back and 2 shirt fronts plus 2 sleeves. Psh, this is not that big of a quilt. So if you remember from that video, almost any size shirt provides enough binding for almost any size quilt. So I think I'm good. So that's that. And I'm excited to finish it. I'm not really excited to do the border. I'm not really a border girl, honestly. I like the quilt top to go all the way to the edge where the binding is. But this particular design, it needs it. And so I'm going to do my duty, put the white border on it, make the border for this one, and then hopefully it will all line up, which it's about time for a video on quilt backs. So maybe this will be the springboard for another video about quilt backs. So that's that. And now we're on to the next. So I start every sentence with so. It's time for baby girl's graduation quilt. I have been, I don't want to say putting it off. I have just been trying to wrap up other projects first. And now she has officially graduated, which was part of the Martin life that we've had. So she's graduated high school. We've been talking about what sort of quilt she wants. And over the past year, every time we go to the quilt store, we look in the I call it the candy aisle, which is the fat quarters that are next to the register. If she sees something she likes, she gets it, or I let her get it. So what she wants is a black and white or black and very light checkerboard quilt. And so we've had lots of discussions as of late about whether she wants it to be completely random. So all of these darks mixed in together, or if she wants it to be a specific pattern, or what. And so we finally had a good sit down conversation and decided that the way I will do it is a 16 patch with all of these dark fabrics, and then not white, but like a off-white or cream background. There was talk of doing a gradient even in the background fabric, so like a cream to white or yellowish cream, and I think we've ultimately decided to nix that. But we got out all the fabrics that we've been collecting over the past year, and she likes a lot of dark. She likes the contrast between the darks and the lights. And she just likes a lot of things that have to do with constellations and the stars. And so these are some of the ones that we have collected. A couple of you have sent me fabric to add to the graduation quilt collection. I'm so grateful. We have needed them. And then so here are some of the ones that we have put together. And what we found as we were laying them out, trying to get an idea of how it was going to play out. This was the start, by the way. This was the first fabric. And this was in a bundle, I think, that I got. And it's a, I can't remember what it is. I want to say it's a Rifle Paper Company. Not sure. But anyway, and she likes a lot of Halloween-y stuff. And so we have skulls, and we have stars, and we have weird, like wood grain. And so there's just a lot here. What we realized when we started laying it out on the dining room table is that going from blue to black is actually not as easy as it sounds. And we had worked through kind of a really good colorway, but there were some outliers. And so we're missing, I never thought I would say this. This is a weird thing to say. The blender between blue and black. And so we're still looking for some fabrics that will help us get from these colors from these blues over to these really stark blacks. And interestingly, black is tricky. Paul often says that in filming, the blacks get washed out, like it's not a true black. And I've had this I don't know what that means. It looks black to me. But if you look here on my table, if I didn't have this on the table and just had this, you would say that's black. But what I have found is when you have a true black next to it, oh gosh, that's not black. This is gray. This has a gray background. I mean, it's very dark gray. Here's another example. This one is black. It's a little bit of a different black, but you can see how now all of a sudden this is not a black background at all. So we are on the prowl again for a few more blacks and maybe some even darker blues to make that transition work. So we have created, I probably just messed it up actually, a pile of, these are ones we like, but we don't know how they're going to work. And these are the ones here that are kind of, I hate to say non-negotiable because I feel like everything is negotiable when it comes to quilting. But these are the ones she really, really likes and really wants to include in the quilt. So yeah, so looking for that. Thank you for those of you who have sent me some fabrics knowing that it would probably be very effective. I'm excited about it. And of course, once we get rolling on this, it'll go pretty quick since it's just those squares together, it's just fun and my favorite. So that's that. And now we're on to the next. If you've been following me on Instagram, you've been watching these blocks come together, and I'm going to rearrange them like 6 times. So this is my linen quilt. I'm going to do some color in the centers of some subsequent blocks, although I still have not settled on that colorway. I just can't land. And that brings me to a point. I was mulling over the backing, quilt backing, for the Magnolia quilt for quite some time because I wanted to get in my mind's eye. I wanted the vision of what it was going to be before I ever cut the first part of that fabric. And I would not have characterized myself as someone who has to sit with something. In fact, I would say I kind of do the ready, fire, aim. Instead of ready, aim, fire, ready, fire, aim is what I think a lot of my previous crafting experiences have been. But with quilting, you don't cut that fabric until you really know what you want to do with it, because once it's cut, that's it. I think with this quilt, if you remember way back to the very first time I mentioned it, which was the wedding project quilt video, I have wanted to do this two-tone, but then I've also wanted to integrate some color into it. And so I'm just, in the meantime, I know there are going to be a lot of these, so I'm just making them. I think they're starting to really come together nicely. I'm learning a lot about sewing curves, what works for me, what works in pressing, what works in sewing. And so that will be a video coming soon, but they really are starting to come together. Now they're a little lumpy on my table because curved seams don't lay flat, and I've highly starched my fabric. What I have also realized is I've been collecting linen, and you can see probably on my table, these 2 linens are not the same linen, these 2 tan linens. And I had the, oh, shoot. But that's going to happen because I'm not using linen off the bolt. I'm using them from pants and shirts and any other skirts, anything that I can find. So I think it's going to be really interesting in the end because these linens are going to come together at some joins. Now, I might get creative with it. Likely will, but I think it's going to provide some visual texture and interest between the color, and it will just hopefully have a color wash feeling about it. So I'm just chipping away at this. Somebody made a suggestion that I get a curved ruler, which I did actually do, broke down and got a wonderful curved ruler, only to find out that this particular size that I have chosen is right in between sizes on the ruler. So, alas, I cannot use that ruler, but I'm using the template from the Copaway quilt by Cotton and Joy. It's worked fine. When it starts getting a little worse for wear, I just cut a new template. I just print a new one on cardstock and print it again. And it's actually starting to be enjoyable to me. I was a little stressed when I first started on the curved seams because I don't feel like I have a lot of experience or confidence in it. And now I'm like, psst, I got it. I can do this. So that's where I am. I think it's going to be really pretty, by the way. It's coming together. This is a much thinner linen. This one is a little bit thicker, but I think it's going to be really pretty in the end. And as I figure out my colorway, we will revisit here again on my sewing table. And then now on to the next. I'm realizing I have a lot on my sewing table. I have a lot that I haven't touched or talked about in a while. And so, goodness gracious, but I am making headway on my WIPS. So there is that. This is the Birch Point quilt. And this was the, picking. This was the fabric pull that I did. I did 2 fabric pull videos back to back, and it was how can I use up these binding strips that I've cut from shirts. And I got the first row done and I got the second row done. And then when I got to the third row, actually I got the third row done too, got to the fourth row and had the, I don't have that last fabric, but I found it this week. And it reminds me, I don't know if it was my grandmother or my mother that used to say, stay open, just stay open. And I'm not a very flexible person by nature. I like a plan. That none of this is going to surprise any of you. I like a plan. I like to think it through. I like to make decisions and then do that. And I got to this last row. So let me show you the first row. And you're gonna get a sneaky shot of the end row. So this was the first row. Talked about this in the video. Loved this combination. And then moving on to the second row, really liked that. Different, but liked it. And then that third row is where the dark carries down. And then this lighter value of this row is actually the medium value of this combination. And I loved this little tiny stripe here that has cornflower and navy in it. And then when I push up the next thing, you'll see that periwinkle cornflower. But the lightest value, I just couldn't seem to find what I was looking for. And I was really just about to use my own advice and experience and make my own fabric with shirts. If you haven't seen that video, I ran into a snag with my older daughter's graduation quilt. I couldn't find a green that worked. I wanted a low volume green. And so I couldn't find it. So I made it with markers and it had little frog emojis on it. So it's just almost to the place where I was getting ready to make fabric for that last row because I wanted the companion to this one that I call the golden sprig. It's white with little golden leaves and kind of flowers and little sprigs of something. I really wanted the blue version of that. And I looked everywhere. I was thinking maybe I would find a tattersall that had that or just a very light blue that worked and couldn't find it. And I have looked, that's one of the unicorns I was looking for at the last thrift store run. And the colorist and I went to I want to say Joann's. I also used to say Penny's. I don't say Walmart's though. And we had to pick up some thread and sewing needles and just some notions. And while we were there, I said, because there's fabric and who's going to not look at the fabric? Let's just look through here and see if anything jumps out. And lo and behold, something jumped out. And this was the fabric that we found. And I think this is the most interesting and lovely fabric. It has this kind of Asian feel. It's almost like a cherry blossoms, except in periwinkle and cornflower. And the branch even has a little bit of this complicated color that I struggled with the whole entire time. I picked it. We got some fabric. And this actually even has a very light, faint blue in the background. And I just loved it. I actually got extra because I thought it was so pretty. And so I was able to bring it home and put it in the thing. And I think put it in the thing, cut strips and sew it into rows and in this matching concept here. And so now this quilt top is done. It's a baby size. I do not have a baby in my family or any friend having a baby, but it was lovely. And so I made it. I don't know about you, but I think it's really pretty. It's a little contrasty in that area with the branches. But I think it really gives it some interest, and I think it's going to be really, really pretty when it's all done. So now I've got to start mulling over that backing. So that's what's on my sewing table. Hopefully I'll make a little more progress on my Magnolia quilt, get that dang border done. and get that finished up for my friend. This will probably go into the white basket of WIPS. It will probably get buried for a little while as I work on my orange peel linen, the Magnolia quilt, and finish up the binding. So that's what I'm doing. I hope you're having great progress on your quilt projects. And I appreciate you being with me today. I hope maybe you've gotten some ideas or encouragement to push through your projects. So that's what I have on my sewing table. Got a lot of work to do still. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Kathy Martin, and this is the Catbird Quilts.